why does it seem like everybody has ADHD all of a sudden? Like this wasn't, I only knew a handful of people who had it. On one hand, we're diagnosing people more and better, but on the other hand,
hey, it's Darlene. I just wanted to introduce my guest today. This is Anna Albright. She is a person that deals with ADHD on a daily basis, and she is a special education educator. So she has experience working with people in the realm of ADHD on a professional level and also on a personal level. Not only that, she's a really good friend of mine. I've known her for about 20 years or so, and so I'm really excited to introduce you to her. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in this kind of content, let me know, and of course, subscribe to the channel.
hi, Star. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here with you today, and hopefully I can be helpful. That's my purpose in every day, is to just be truly helpful.
I love that. And not only have we just been friends for so long, she's one of my best friends, very, very dear friend. So we have a very deep, loving connection that I can honestly say I don't have with anybody else in the world, which is endearing. And for many different reasons, many layers, not just the ADHD layer, but layers such as we have studied A Course in Miracles for a long, long time at this point, definitely over 10 years. Probably closer to 15. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
when I think about that, a long time. But she was on my journey with that.
Might even be closer to 20. Like,
right,
we're getting
because
old.
I don't say that. But really, we have had these multi-layers of life together, which I'm so grateful for, because it's always beautiful to have friends that you've had and that have seen you in so many different versions of yourself. I love it. So yeah.
And they say that those connections are your signs, I guess, of people that you do have past lives with, and that you're in this life together, helping each other through your journey. And especially people who study the course together or feel this like, we need to work on this thing. It's very, very powerful to do that, and I think we recognize that pretty early in our relationship. And it's just also said that those are your signs that these are your people, your special relationships, your really special people. So
yes, we most definitely noticed that early on in our relationship, our friendship, and the connection that we had, and the divergent way of thinking, although, now I could say that from this lens 20 years later, but, at that point I couldn't articulate it that way, but it's really awesome. So, yeah, I also want to just make a little disclaimer. We're not doctors, but we have lived this life that we're talking about in the ADHD world. So if you relate to what we're talking about, awesome. We'd love to hear what you have to say, or if you have questions or anything in the comments. So feel free to leave us a comment or tell us what you think, and by the way, you can also find Anna Mir if you'd like to get in touch with her. She does do readings, and she does journey work as well. You can get in touch with me and I'll get you in touch with her. I don't want to just out your email box on the internet here.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, okay. So there are 3 different types, and maybe there's subtypes of ADHD. I've heard people talk about that. I don't know if you have or not, but there are mainly 3 types of, 3 types of ADHD, just to go over what that is. The ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. There's different hypotheses and ideas of research of where ADHD has come from, and how we end up with it. But the 3 different types of ADHD are ADHD, which is hyperactivity. That means they're mostly hyper and bouncing around. Like when I think prior to understanding ADHD, which is like more my later in life, I would have thought about like a bunch kid bouncing around and that kind of thing. There is the inattentive type, which is more spaced out, where they're just like physically here, but like mentally gone. And I don't mean that like, and there's something like, there's something bad going on the inside. They're just not paying attention. And then there's like the combined type. So I've been
Mhm.
diagnosed with a combined type of ADHD. And
Mhm.
looking back, I always think, wow, how did they not know? But they didn't know what they didn't know, you know?
Mhm.
What was your experience with?
So I've been diagnosed with the inattentive type, and that was me as a child. And so my background is in special education, and as a student, I was that kid where the teacher is like going over some really difficult or challenging math instruction, and I was contemplating the meaning of the zero. I'm like, wow, the zero goes on and on and on. Like, where does it stop? My head was just like so deep, and I would just get so focused on my thoughts that I would miss everything that they were saying. I wouldn't hear anything. And so it came as no surprise when I was tested, and I was tested from a neuropsychiatrist. So it was a very in depth 5 hour testing that my attention span is very short. It's just a matter of seconds, and so I had to do all of these different things to try to keep myself on track. And that's also why I went into special education, was because I understood that experience. Um,
So were you
so
diagnosed at a young age?
No, I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. And I know you and I have talked about this many times because we've known each other for so long. But I felt like for most of my life, I always had to, because like I said in school, as a child, I was constantly feeling like I was behind. And so because I wasn't fully paying attention, and so I was having to work faster, work harder, do double the work. Like, for instance, with math, I would check all of my math like 3 times because I wanted to make sure that it was accurate, because I would get like so sidetracked that I just couldn't stay on task. And so I had to work really fast to do that. And so I continued things like that, and I created these little rules in my life, like always put your keys here, always put your shoes here, so that I'm not like losing things or misplacing things. And so it wasn't until I've used the analogy that it felt like I was juggling lit knives all the time. I've just kind of got this like juggling act going all the time. And I got to be closer to 50, and when menopause started, I was perimenopausal, and I felt like my memory started to shift. I could no longer juggle all of the knives. And so that's when I got to the point where I thought it was anxiety. I thought I had this like low level of anxiety. Sorry, my screen just went blank. I apologize. I don't know if it cut out. But
Yeah.
I thought it was anxiety. And so when I went in and I explained, hey, this is my experience with this, and I just can't keep up anymore. I can't do all the things anymore. And I that's when she said, it sounds a lot like you might have ADHD. And that's when I was tested. So I was close to 50. And I had treatment resistant depression, I had treatment resistant anxiety. And it wasn't until I was more open. At first, I wasn't very open to medicine. I just wasn't. I know we both share that experience. But
Hmm.
once I did decide to try, I do a non stimulant. I'm on Strattera. I did try a stimulant. It just upset my stomach too much. And so, and that's what worked.
Hmm.
And the anxiety went away, which is so, like, it wasn't anxiety. It was me constantly feeling like I need to like do something. I just felt this like internal shakiness all the time, because
Yes.
I kind of felt like I was behind everybody, trying to catch up.
Yes. And the way I describe that shakiness is, this is me with anxiety. And that's how when I look back at my younger years. But in all honesty, I was very good at masking. So very good at like showing what I'm
Oh yeah,
supposed to look like on the outside. So you think I'm cool, but on the inside, it felt like a rock band was playing, but not just like a good rock band, like old classic rock. It was like a heavy metal, death metal mosh
yeah,
pit going on underneath the
yeah.
skin. On the outside,
Hmm.
I'm like perfectly fine. So I learned that, and it wasn't something till hindsight and reflection backwards. what I was doing, but I learned to behave like that because it was, what was expected of you, and that was just, that was just how I ended up coping for a lot of my life. But on the inside, it was like this, like that's what it felt like. And so
Yeah,
I
I
definitely
can
relate
relate to that
to it.
feeling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And what you said about, math class too. Oh gosh, I was in third grade and we were
Mhm.
talking about math, and my third grade teacher was sitting in the front row. Because I was also a little disruptive, but I wasn't like terrible. But I was a
Mhm.
jokester and whatever. That was just who I am, right? Kind of
Yeah.
funny and like maybe funny at inappropriate times, which I did always, and I still do. Not as much as when I was little, but laugh at inappropriate times. Like literally, that's something I used to do really bad when I was a kid. But when I was in third grade, she's talking about math and she's doing the times table and all of that. And I was doing the masking and I was like looking at her, and she comes up to me after talking about it for a while, and she kind of whispers to me, like, "You look like you're paying attention, but you have no idea what I just talked about." And I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't say yes because I was a little kid. How old are you in third grade?
Mhm. Right.
But that was such a like, oh my
A
God
moment.
moment that
Mhm.
looking back, it stuck with me. Like I don't remember much about my third grade, but like
Mhm.
it's a moment that you look back and you're like, wow, that was these, because in the diagnosis process for me too, which also took me time, it's a lot of reflection of like, did this happen when I was younger, or is this something more of the now? But it
Mhm.
was just, it's called, and when I got a little older enough to explain how I was feeling, it was labeled anxiety, but it really wasn't anxiety,
Mhm.
because it's been, much better understanding now that I have a diagnosis of ADHD and knowing how to work with myself as opposed to against myself, like fitting that round peg into a square hole or whatever, because that's what
Mhm.
it's kind of like, the world is what it is, and it's not necessarily set up for people with ADHD. That's
Mhm.
it's yeah,
I was going
yeah.
to interject that, an interesting thing, because honestly, I wasn't like completely sold on, it was, although they ran the test on the specific, like my attention span, they ran multiple tests for me to take. And so, I mean, it was pretty clear that I had it, but I wasn't completely buying into that, because I've always had this mindset of like, if you just try harder, think fast, just do something different, you can overcome something. But it wasn't until the very first day that I took an ADHD medication and I felt calm for the first time in my life. And I felt like so relaxed. I felt like I could sleep. Like I felt, how you would think that ADHD medicine, you would be hyper or something. I know that people who misuse it have that happen. But when you truly have the dysregulation that comes along with ADHD, and you actually have the problems that happen in the prefrontal cortex, you need the medication. Because I noticed how calm I felt, and it was so obvious to me in that moment I had ADHD. Like, wow, I didn't realize that this is probably everything became really clear. I didn't feel like I was all over the place. My thoughts were concise, and I could get a point across a lot more clearly. It was just like this glaring difference, and I don't know if you had a similar experience with that, but it was like, yeah, it took that
Yeah.
moment for me to go, okay, yeah, I have this diagnosis.
Well, even now, it's like I wake up and I know I probably should wait to drink the coffee, but I don't. It's like my ritual of getting up and drinking a shot of espresso. If I
Mhm.
sit down, I will go back to sleep. I will like be so calm. I'm like, just the
Yeah,
espresso, just like,
coffee's always done that to
and
me.
I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I have an expensive espresso machine I bought years ago because I love coffee, because it does this chilling, relaxing thing for me where
Mhm.
I'm not like, oh, all over. It just, I can focus. I can sit and have a conversation where I'm like looking in the person's eyes and I'm not doing something else while I'm listening, because I do that a lot too, and
Mhm.
I feel relaxed, but coffee does that to me, and I don't necessarily get that some
Mhm.
people get.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
I
that was
totally get
definitely,
that.
yeah, that was definitely an experience that I had too. Yeah.
Mhm.
So something that I have noticed with myself, and I'm sure you have experience with this too, is ADHD time blindness.
Oh
Is that
yeah.
something you experience? Yeah.
It is and it isn't. I think that, those, how I mentioned earlier that I trained myself to have these rules. That was part of it, was making sure that I was watching the clock, making sure that I was early, making sure that one of the rules that I loved this expression, which was kind of like, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. um, because prior to 26 years old, I was continually late. I mean, I was just late to everything. I just could not make it on time, and so I almost became obsessed with like tracking time, setting alarms, making sure I was, where I needed to be. And of course, when smartphones came along, and I know we all do this, is like I have all these reminders that I set, and make sure that I'm also like giving myself time to like make a decision about what I'm going to wear, giving myself time to get to drive somewhere. Like I had to do all of this planning ahead that isn't common all the time with ADHD. That's part of the disorder, is not being able to like envision what it looks like to set time aside.
Mhm.
And so that's, with kids in the classroom, a lot of times you work with them on that very thing. Is like, this is how you schedule your time. And it's just like repetitive training to like make that second nature. But I get time blindness when I'm hyper focused or I'm doing something I love. I can lose all track of time, and if I have all the time in the world and I don't have to be anywhere, it feels like minutes go by, especially, and you see that with ADHD all the time. It's like when you're doing something you absolutely love or you just feel really happy about, um, time has no meaning, although, time doesn't really have a meaning, but, as long as we're in this plane of existence, time has meaning, I guess. But yeah, I have and I haven't. I would say I have, but I taught myself to notice time.
Yeah. Yeah. It has helped me to, like what you said, and that came later in life. In my earlier years, when I realized that, like, hey, you have to be on time for things, I set my clocks ahead 5 minutes, like, or
Mhm,
more. Every clock in the car clock, every clock in my world was like, everybody would
mhm,
be like, there's a time warp between like my watch and your clock, or, your kitchen
mhm.
and your living room clocks. And I'm like, that's because I have to set them ahead of time, because then I'll be on time.
Yes.
Sounds crazy, but that was my
Yeah.
experience, because for all the same reasons that you just mentioned. And I
Mhm.
can become, this is the thing, ADHD is not, it's such a weird name for what's going on with us.
Yeah,
Attention
it is weird.
deficit hyperactivity disorder. I
Mhm,
don't have a deficit of attention at all, and I don't think anyone with ADHD does. My problem is that have I struggle with the attention I am giving. Either it's too much and it's like hyper focus
mhm,
mode, where I can
mhm,
sit there for, 5 hours and like do research or something like that. By the way,
mhm,
I'm an astrologer and I do astrology research. That's
mhm,
what absorbs me, usually one of the things that absorbs me. Or
mhm.
and I forget to do things like pee, or like,
Oh,
oh yeah, I have a body. I have to go and eat, and
yes.
my stomach is
Yeah,
grumpy. No wonder I'm grumpy. Like
yeah.
anything, right? Or like I'm trying to do this and I hear the bird outside, and my birds. Oh my
Mhm.
God. Like, and then my whole life
Yeah,
is just somewhere else. And it's not a deficit of attention. It's a regulation of attention.
it
I
is.
think the
Yeah.
name is so weird. Like, they need to
Mhm.
change it.
Yeah, a regulation or dysregulation of attention is definitely, it has to do with, you're right. Like, it definitely has to do with how we're regulating our attention, because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And to go back to what I was saying about timeliness, like the methods in which you were talking about, I have created those types of systems for myself too, like the not losing your keys thing. When I was in my, early 20s, I would go like crazy looking for my keys all over the house. And, I had kids and I was just like, oh no, where are the keys, And my father taught me, like, if you have like a dish in your house, and he used to collect rocks, and crystals. And so I got one and put a bunch of crystals in it. And he's like, if you always put them in that dish, you will always know where they're at. So then I got in the thing where I walk in the house and it's just like, it's a mental thing with me. They do not go anywhere but that spot, and I do that now. They're clipped onto my purse now. It's even better. But that did happen. And it took me the like crazy moments of like, oh my gosh, I lost my car keys or something, my house keys, whatever, to actually, realize that, hey, you should probably make a system for yourself. So that does help a lot, creating those systems.
And I feel like creating those systems, if there's anybody watching or listening that has a child or they themselves are, struggling with time blindness or losing track of time. I've heard a lot of people in recent years kind of like, well, should we really force that on kids, to keep track of time, or, especially when they're doing something that they love, which I'm definitely all for kids doing the things that they love. That's how you learn best, is when you're excited about something. And if you can find what kids are excited about and teach them through that excitement, that is the best mix of learning. I mean, that is like the best environment to learn in, is when a kid is like, I'm really excited about this thing and I want to write about it or whatever. And in recent years, I've heard there's just a lot of like, let kids learn in their own time, which I am pro that. But I also feel like if we're preparing kids and ourselves for like living among the billions of people that we live with, that there has to be some type of conforming. And so, what we're getting today is a lot of kids, sometimes parents homeschooling their kids for a while because they were struggling in school. Maybe they didn't have the tools to kind of give the teachers or even force the school to give their kid what they need. That's 99.9% of the time what I find has happened. But they pull their kid out and they homeschool, but then they bring them back and they're so like out. They're just really out of sync, and it's a really sad experience, like to watch a kid, even if it's in the 8th grade, because a lot of times like Montessori schools or, schools that give more time, which I'm definitely all for that. They're completely ill prepared, like, how do you keep your backpack in order? How do you do your assignments? Like, how will you be prepared for college? I mean, there are only so many things that you can do that at some point you will work a job, and we're not always afforded the opportunity to just work out of our house. Not everybody gets to do that. And I have been fortunate to do those kinds of things, but in our lives. But I just do think that it's important to create some of those guidelines and like a parameter, like, hey, if I'm going to, instead of beating myself up for being late all of the time, maybe I do need to wake up a half an hour earlier. Or for me, it's anymore, the older I've gotten, it's hours earlier, because I know that I need more time to wake up and I need more time to get myself together. And so then it becomes about good planning and less, it's more about good planning and less about just doing whatever makes us feel good in the moment, because we have to get along in society, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So
right.
I just think it's important. And my mother did the same thing with me that you mentioned, that, hey, you have a tray here, right, by your bed or whatever, put your key, purse, like all of those things right beside you, and then you always know where they are. And those kinds of rules were what helped me to survive in all kinds of different work environments. So
and you've worked in many different work environments. I mean, you worked in finance, you worked in a not-for-profit, you were CEO of that, or if that was the right word. Executive director. So you've done like so many different work, different types of work. You've worked for yourself, So
Mm-hmm.
you need, and you do, like, that's the thing when you're younger, and that's the beauty of, if you understand and your child, I've come across some people that have children that they're like, no way does my kid have this. And I'm like, ooh, if they're telling you, it's not a bad idea just to listen, even if you just do
Yeah.
therapy type stuff instead of medication. I understand why people wouldn't want to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
if they're struggling, like, there really is, and I don't know the statistics, but the statistics of people having depression and problems, massive problems later in life because they weren't diagnosed as a child, are humongous. You probably know more than I do about that, but like, that's an important thing to, pay attention to if your kid's struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and when we were children, they didn't really know that girls could get ADHD. They thought it was
Mm-hmm.
mainly a boy thing. In fact, they called it ADD back then.
Yeah,
Now they
I
call it
did. Mm-hmm.
ADHD, so then they just subtype it out. But before it
Mm-hmm.
was ADD, it was another name, and I don't remember what it was. I've looked it up,
I
but
think it was just hyperactivity. That was kind of what they
yes.
diagnosed kids with was hyperactivity.
Yeah, but my point is they've known this from at least the 1800s at some point about ADHD. It's
Mhm.
like the most commonly known, and I don't even like calling it a mental disorder, but that's what
Mhm.
mental health disorder is, the most commonly understood mental health disorder. Like, that's what I've read in statistics and such, so they know well about it, is my point with all of that. um,
Mhm.
so, and yeah, it's definitely something. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just thinking I didn't want to. We I say this all the time when because we're friends, but I didn't want to hijack our conversation because I'm notorious for that. But I also know that you and I could go down a rabbit hole and come back to what we were talking about. But I didn't know if that was a good segue to talk about some of the recent research that has been done because I think a lot of people are like, why does it seem like everybody has ADHD all of a sudden? Like this wasn't, I only knew a handful of people who had it. On one hand, we're diagnosing people more and better, but on the other hand, there has been some more recent research. And I feel like the studies that were done were pretty broad. And I feel like when you have hospitals like John Hopkins come in and say, we view this research as valid, and it isn't like somebody's making any money off of this research, but they've found a connection. Some people call it casual connection, some people call it definitive connection, but between Tylenol and how much Tylenol mothers use during birth. And this sounds like a conspiracy theory. It does. The first time I heard someone mention this, I'm like, is that true? I'm just not so sure. And it was a nurse who told me this, like, oh, we don't take Tylenol these days. Like, unless you are like really bad and you have a really severe fever, when you're pregnant, you do not take Tylenol. And that the study or the research had found that mothers who, it took, when I say extensive time, I believe the date, and I would have to check the studies. I have a little bit of the information I have, but I want to say for 7 days, three different occurrences that lasted 7 days throughout a pregnancy. Those children have a substantially higher rate of ADHD and autism.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so it was a very specific, it's not like every single mother that ever took Tylenol or every single person, and it doesn't happen after. It's only in the womb. It's when the embryo is or the fetus is impacted by what the mother is taking. And it was a very specific connection, which leads me to think, wow, like we really have never researched like what does Tylenol do. I mean, it's been around for so long, and it's like one of the number one. It's always been my personal preference, and while I was pregnant, I had
I,
terrible headaches all the time, and I
mhm.
took tons of Tylenol. We viewed it as safe, and we
Mhm.
didn't know. So it's interesting because I'd like to see what unfolds with this research and what the future will bring, and maybe we'll come up with some ways to, better treatments or. But prevention is like if we can find ways to prevent something, that's
That's
all
better.
where we
Mhm.
want to go because then we don't have to have kids on medicine. We don't have to have, all of these extra services that kids need in school or doing things like pulling a kid out because they are being bullied and it's more safe to not be in a public school setting sometimes. So I get all the things, but that's when I heard the study and I read multiple studies on that have been done on this research, and it made the most sense to me that it would have. You know, we've always like there's got to be something in the water. You know, like what
Yeah,
could and to think, wow, it was this like thing that we've all taken while we were pregnant. It was the one thing, I don't know about you, but my doctor said you cannot take anything but Tylenol or Sudafed. Those were the two
same.
things that if you had the flu or a cold, you couldn't take any cold medicine. So, I mean, we knew that could harm the fetus. But the only thing you could take were these two things that weren't so good for you.
Hmm.
um,
I
but,
didn't know about the Sudafed. I didn't remember that, but I didn't
well,
really have those kinds
Sudafed,
of issues. I can
Sudafed,
see
it
where
hasn't
that
been,
wouldn't be good though, because it does kind of
yeah,
speed your
well,
metabolism up
so
and stuff.
it's not so much that it's harmful, it's just some research has shown that it's really not very helpful. Like you're taking something that's really not doing what it says that it would do in the first place, so why take it?
I see.
Um, because it doesn't do any of the things that it claims that it could do, and it doesn't really help. So it's interesting that those were the few things. Benadryl was the other thing that I was told I could take, and that was it.
Yeah, well, definitely when I was pregnant, they told me it was only Tylenol, and I only took it a few times because my father, bless his heart, scared the daylights out of me with when I got pregnant with my daughter. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
don't take any drugs when you're, and like he was talking about, over the counter drugs. Don't take any drugs. And he told me about what thalidomide is. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Mm-hmm.
it is a drug that was for morning sickness that was in the 40s or so, 1940s. And
Yes.
it literally
Mm-hmm.
made people be born with no arms and legs, sometimes
Yeah.
just a trunk and a head. And like it totally, and it was for morning sickness. And they
Mm-hmm.
didn't make the connection. I mean, there are
For a
still people
long
alive
time.
today for a long time. And when you
Mm-hmm.
dig deeper into that, it's even worse. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's true. The people that were
Mm-hmm.
in charge of that drug company were actually people that were like generals and such of in the Nazi generals and such. Why were they allowed to make medication? Like,
Yeah.
what the F?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like seriously?
I
Yeah.
know.
So my father scared the living daylights out of me about that and like don't take any drugs. But there were times when I took Tylenol a few times, but that was
Mm-hmm.
because I was like, oh no, I can't have my baby coming out weird or something. And fortunately, my
Yeah.
kids are both fine. But yeah, there
Mm-hmm.
it's a thing. Yeah, and I guess you don't know what you don't know, but and that's a thing about medication too, especially if you're pregnant, you're nurturing a child inside of you. You don't know what's going to
Mm-hmm.
affect you and
Yeah. None of us
how
do.
that can happen. It's
Mm-hmm.
also really interesting talking about research, and I know I've talked about this with you, and it's out that I'm a research astrologer. So I use an evidence-based model of astrology to
Mm-hmm.
figure things out. And things such as bipolar, eating disorders, heart disease, those things we've been able to figure, those were not my studies, but we've been able to figure out markers in the person's astrological makeup and those problems. Like they were all different studies. I've done my own studies, but they were more on astrological topics, such as what is the meaning of something in the planet or something, or a harmonic is what we would call it. I've done that kind of research. Oh, I've done research on the fixed stars too. But my point is, so my research is just a little different, but having that I have ADHD, I really wanted to see if I could figure out if there's something going on with the person with ADHD and the astrology. And it's not to negate anything that we just talked about in the sense of, the mother took, Tylenol or whatever, and that's caused it. Not to negate that, could still be a thing, but does it show up in the astrology? Well, I don't know. And the thing of it
Mm-hmm.
is that we have a database. It's a public database with close to 100,000 people in it, famous people from history with good birth times. But the amount of people for ADHD is like 30 something with good birth times, and you need good birth times to be able to do the astrology. So a project that I'm working on, I decided, well, that's not good. I can't really do a study with that many people. I need more. Is I created a website and a way to collect data for this research project that it's anonymous. I would be the only person to know your email address, because I asked for that to make sure it's a human that is entering this in. But I'm trying to collect data so that I can figure out, is there a link here with the astrology and the ADHD? And if there is, then what ways in which I can help them, if it's possible. I don't know. I would love that to happen, and I created a website for that. It's researchadhd.com. And so I wanted to share that. I mean, this has seemed like a good time to do it, because we're talking about research, and it's definitely something I want to be able to help people with, because I feel like, the more we know, the better. And the fact that, my hyperfocus is research, and understanding how people are and things that go on with them, it seems like a good contribution of myself to give to the world, and that would be meaningful to me too. Yeah.
I was just thinking, I know you so well, and I know everything about what you do with research astrology, but a couple questions that popped in my head for maybe somebody who's watching to maybe share is, when you say we have been researching, who are those people that you work with on this research? And then also maybe share a little bit about how you do your research and how it relates to astrology. And I think something that would be really cool is to share some of the findings, which because I'm a Virgo, and I'm like very Virgo, I love numbers, I love research, I just love science and math, and I like those things, and I like concrete numbers, and not that I haven't had plenty of readings, and I have my own level of intuition myself. I've done readings, and I'm a believer. I'll just say that I am a believer. But I became more of a believer when I started to see some of the studies that have been done on astrology and the connections. Maybe for anybody who's watching, do you think sharing a little bit about that, like who's involved? Where is the research done, and maybe a little bit about that. I think it would be cool to let people know, because I think it's cool.
Yeah, definitely. So I went to school. I started in 2012. I went to school to learn an evidence-based approach to astrology. The type of astrology is called vibrational astrology. And we use modern research methods, for instance, extreme case sampling, exploratory research. And if we can get to a space with the exploratory research where we have something and we understand it, then we can do confirmatory research with another group of those types of people. So for instance, if I figured out something going on in the charts of people with ADHD, and then I had another group of people with ADHD, I can confirm it with the second group if I can repeat it. This is the way science itself is done. So I went to school for this, and a couple years ago, the Cosmobiology Institute, you can find them, cosmobiology.org. I'll put links to everything in the description box too. But they formed, and last year I became one of the board members. I was always supporting them, but they're a group of people. Some of them I went to school with. One of them is my teacher. They founded this not-for-profit organization. And the mission of the not-for-profit organization is to understand if we can find things like I'm talking about, where there's a link between people with ADHD diagnoses and the astrology. And whether we like it or not, the answers that we come up with, we want to do it in an unbiased way. But that's the whole mission of Cosmobiology Institute. So I work with them. I work with a few other people that aren't necessarily directly into the Cosmobiology Institute, but supporting of it, because the whole mission is not of Cosmobiology isn't necessarily vibrational astrology, because there's other ways to do it. It's just vibrational is my way. But it supports the evidence-based approach, as opposed to the traditional passed down astrology, and there's nothing wrong with that because we wouldn't be where we're at right now had we not had the traditional passed down knowledge. But you know, we have the tools that we have, so why wouldn't we look? This is just how my brain works. Why wouldn't we look at the, you know, use these modern research tools? And you know, we would do like I said, extreme case sampling, where we take a group of people and we figure that out. Is there something going on in their chart that we can figure out, like a certain planetary configuration? Research that I've done before is, like, for instance, I did on the fixed star Regulus. I presented it at a conference in 2023, and I took all the people in the database that I was just talking about that had Regulus conjunct their sun as close as can be, like with no, what that's called an orb, the distance that they are apart from each other. And I looked at all those people from top down, like strongest, closest orb down, and I looked to see if I could find what was going on with them and does this relate to each other, and if it does, that's another type of extreme case sampling. And then I took them Regulus people with Regulus conjunct their Mercury and Regulus conjunct their Mars and their Venus. So all differently, Regulus conjunct each one of them differently. And if I could see what was going on there, someone had already prior done the research on like the meaning of the sun, the meaning of Venus. So we build this model of like understanding. We understand what Venus means. So we kind of go in this like in a way where we're like, okay, we kind of understand what Venus means. We're pretty sure, we're like pretty confident in that. And so now Regulus is the variable we don't understand. But if we start looking at it, then we get in like a think tank type of situation, and we communicate about it. For years, we've done conferences sharing our findings. So, and there's still conferences going on. I'll be speaking at a conference in September this year. And again, next year I have other engagements that I'll be speaking on, but doing research. I'm not sure if I'll be speaking on ADHD next year or not, because I'm not sure if I have enough people, hopefully by that time, but I want to be very clear and do confirmatory research before I end up presenting it, fully presenting it.
And that can take years sometimes.
And that can take years, correct. But I'm doing research on other projects. I'm also researching financial astrology, which is really interesting because it's all numbers. So there's not like any, psychological stuff behind it. So yeah, so that's kind of how it works, like that's the mechanics of it, that we build the model, we test the model. Does it work? Do we have confidence in it? Sometimes we don't have confidence in it, but yet there's still something there nagging and we have to keep digging, and that's the fun part about it, where I get lost for like 5 hours and forgot that I had to eat and drink water. I'm like,
or do basic human functions.
Right. Like, oh my gosh, you're right. I have to go to the bathroom. Whatever. It just happens. So yeah, that's it. And I mean, the Cosmobiology Institute is an amazing organization. I'm so proud to be part of this organization because their whole focus is that. There's a few others, and there are other people that just do research on their own. Research is interesting because a lot of people like to do that on their own and then share it with people like the Cosmobiology Institute. But I'm really excited about the Cosmobiology Institute because I feel like we should have this in school. Like, this is my little quirky thing, but I feel like we should understand astrology and use it as a tool to help people in life. I just feel like that should be more mainstream, and so that's part of the Cosmobiology's purpose, is to help to get people aware. And that's one of the reasons I asked you to come on here with me, not just to share the cool stories and talk about ADHD, but like also talk about the idea of, like looking at things from a different perspective, like understanding things from a perspective that not necessarily is mainstream, like, yeah.
I was just thinking, like, I think a lot of people think about astrology and they're like, oh, horoscopes, or am I compatible with, this person in a relationship? And it seems like there's just this like tiny little sliver that is really popular that most people focus on. But the cool thing, because I'm a little bit nerdy myself, the cool thing about your research astrology and vibrational astrology, the things that I like about those are what you've told me, is that, well, not just you, but I mean, there are books out there and there's research out there, is that it's very precise and you can look at time frames and other things that are happening. A lot of people have never even had like a natal chart done or understand, like, there is so much more to astrology. I know I didn't know, at least in this lifetime, I didn't know all of the things that can be done with astrology that are very concrete and very set. Like you can go back and look from birth, something that was having an influence. And a lot of people are, oh, you can read into that. And I have gone into astrology, which I think is great. I think true researchers bring in the skeptics. You bring in the people who are not believers. You bring, because you need to hear from all people. And I was definitely that person for a long time initially, like, oh, that's kind of cool. I think I'm going to go into this with a grain of salt and have you read some of my chart for me. And then later taking notes and writing down dates and looking at things and going, oh wow, that was really accurate, that actually happened. And it would be a big thing, not something that's like, oh, I think I felt like happy at that time, so that must have been an influence in my life. No, it was like, hey, you're going to come into some money and I have $45,000 suddenly. Like, that's a really big amount.
Yeah.
That is
That's a
a
big
really
one.
huge, like, yeah, this is going to be a really big time because you have all of these influences. Those are the moments where it's like, you can't second guess that. I can't
Yeah.
say that was my emotions. I can't say that was a coincidence. I can't, there's just been enough of those things that have come up that it's like, this isn't a coincidence. This is a way of tracking time in our reality. And
Right.
track these events that you have. Sometimes it's more than just an influence. It's like, this is a thing that could likely happen type thing. And so I just think that it's interesting for me, like thinking from the outside, I guess, or as a person who's outside of the astrology world, like you are, going to conferences and rubbing elbows with some of the more famous astrology people, and you yourself being in your own right professional and famous, I feel, and and doing the things that you've done to know that this is way more than just horoscopes. And so that's how you could use research to say, can we capture in this data in someone's natal chart that ADHD is a thing? Can we capture that? Not that it's a thing, but something that you can see. And I think that's really amazing. And I hope that more participants will help you with your research, because that's what it's all about. And I know that you love it. And I also think that it's cool to see the other side of some of the things that everyone is doing the research on right now, and their
Yeah.
findings. I mean, it's always cool when the findings are like, yeah, our question or our hypothesis was proven, and that is
Right.
a long process, because once you think you've proven something, then you need someone else to try to poke holes in it, and that can take its own amount of time. Hole poking can take longer than the original research to begin with.
Yes.
And so, because then you have to, can you replicate this data? Can you replicate the study? And it's through that you can come to, hey, this is something that's true. So it does take years. It
Yeah,
does
it
take time.
does. Yeah,
Mhm.
and the probably the most thorough research has been done on people with bipolar, and it wasn't just the markers of someone to have bipolar in their chart, like, you could potentially have this. It was also when you're going to go into a manic or depressive episode, and
Wow.
that was clearly seen. And I would
Mhm.
look at the books, but it's somewhere back there. But it's a whole book on the whole way he did it, and that was
Mhm.
actually my teacher did that. Santino Mancuso. He's also on the board of directors of the Cosmobiology Institute. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, we have a doctor from Stanford, who's part of the board. We have, not just, woo-woo astrologers or
Mhm.
anything like that. They're actually doing real research. So, it's a thing, and it's fascinating to me because, like you, I started off reading like the newspaper when I was a kid and knowing, oh, I'm an Aquarius, which I didn't
Mhm.
realize when I first started reading it, that I have like 4 planets in Aquarius and my midheaven. So like, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that Venus had his own sign or
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah. And, to really do real research, you can't just do it yourself. You can do it yourself, but you have to, like you were saying, that has to be a group of people that
Mhm.
want to like test it and, like you said, poke holes in it and or refine it. And then when it's done, like, can we replicate it? Can we, and so it's definitely something that has to be done in a community. So after I graduated from school, it was like a not quite a 3-year program. More people started getting into a group, and it was 2019 when we had our first vibrational astrology conference that I spoke at, and I talked about 2 different topics. One was vibrations, which is just looking at aspects in the chart, and the other one was on astrocartography, looking at places on Earth and how your energy would be at certain places on Earth, which is such a fascinating field too. It's such a but I presented research and I presented at different conferences and such. So it's pretty cool that there is, this is alive, and I think it's a movement. That
Mhm.
people are awakening to these are things that are in the modern world, and I love traditional astrology. That's where I started learning the traditional hand-me-down stuff. I love it because that we wouldn't be where we're at without that traditional astrology. But I also know that we're like in 2025 right now. We should keep going with the tools we have. So,
Mhm.
I mean, when you think about it, 100 years ago, they didn't have computers. I mean, it was way less than 100 years ago, but they were doing charts by hand. Like, they have an ephemeris. This is a book of where the planets are every day, and the exact degree that they're in the sky. And they would sit there and just write out the chart. If you're going to get now we have computers that do it instantaneously. You put your birth
Mhm.
information, is like, boom, there's your chart. So
Which is so cool.
yes, it makes sense
It's
that humans
interesting.
evolve. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because when I was a much younger woman, I want to say that I was in my 20s, early 20s, I went to an astrologer and she did my natal chart. It took weeks. Like you couldn't get in to see an astrologer like right now. Like, hey, I want to go pop on, and then you have like this program. It was she would have to plan for you. She would have to write like this physical. I had a physical paper that like had this my whole chart on it, and she would do two, one for herself, and she would keep records by hand. I mean, this was back in the 90s, probably,
Mhm.
early 90s, late 80s. And it's just like amazing how technology has not only made things faster and easier, but it's opened the door for us to like think. And that's what educating society does. When you're educated on something, then you can start to create innovation and we start to create technology. And when you have technology, you can wonder about things. You're no longer doing all of this handwritten charts. You can now say, I wonder if we can research this, or I wonder if we can study this. And I do feel like that it's opened doors
Oh, definitely.
for those types of things and that deeper thought. And not that it really matters to me personally; it doesn't affect me directly if astrology is proven or disproven. But I like having concrete things, and I think that it just makes things feel more valid because as just as a person, I like to be data driven in my interactions, like anything that matters, I guess I should say. And with astrology, you're working with people, you're working with human beings, and so it's important that you do have some kind of basis for like that backs this up. Like, hey, we care about people, and that's why we want to do research.
Mhm.
Same
Mhm.
reason we do any scientific research. But I hijacked our conversation, as I am so prone to do whenever we're talking. But I get, I nerd out on my, my love of learning. And I know that that's infectious, just like your love of astrology and research is infectious. So why not share my love of both things by
Absolutely.
rambling?
Well, yeah, and that's why I asked you to do this with me because I thought that would be great, and I love that you hijacked the conversation for a moment because I love hearing what you have to say too. And for anybody that's watching too, I'd love to hear what you have to say as well. So don't be shy, leave comments in the wherever the box down below
Comment
because I
box.
would whatever that thing is where you write things. But no, seriously, I do love hearing it because I think that's how the conversation gets to be more normal instead of the stigma that happens with a lot of times with ADHD, which is something I also thought about with this conversation. It's why do I want to have this conversation, not just to share research, talk about myself in ways that, I don't always talk about because I'm not like walking around telling people, hey, I have ADHD. Although if you're important to me, you
Yeah.
probably know it. And if you're watching this, you do now. But because I have certain quirks of my personality that is different. And I like to tell people that are close to me, to understand that I'm a little different. I'm not necessarily bad. I don't see it in a bad way. It's like I just different, just quirky, a little bit unusual compared to the norm. I have another friend who has ADHD. She calls it neurospicy. So I love that.
I've heard
The
that, and I love it too.
neurospicy. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
cute, right? So it's that, and it's also because the stigma. The stigma sucks. Like, it just sucks. Like, think about it. It's
I
somebody,
know.
it's either like, and I've been met with all of this. At first, I was really sensitive to it. And like, then I was like, oh no, I don't want to tell people because then I'm going to be stigmatized. And
Well, I was thinking that, I mean, I think that it's important to mention that, like, that I hate to say we out ourselves because it's like, it does seem like we mask and we hide and we, are juggling all of these things and we call it multitasking. And, a lot of the information, the reason that we wanted to have this conversation is to not say, hey, for any reason, we're trying to suggest that people should. I want to just choose really carefully. This isn't an excuse. Like we're not looking at this as like, oh, this is an excuse for me. Oh, I have ADHD, so now I don't have to do, you know, my work, or I don't have to do my thing, or to go to the store and to like function, because I feel like we need to raise more awareness about this, remove the stigma, because so many people, we just seem to have a trend of people using labels. And I think that's why people are starting to say, well, that happens to me too, because we've got this whole massive thing. And I love social media and I love technology. Like I love all of the information that's out there. I'm not on it all the time, but because I love to be outside, and I love, you do too. We like gardening and we like nature, and um, but I feel like it's tainting for those of us who have had like a pretty big struggle with ADHD, for someone to say, oh, it seems like everybody's got that all of a sudden. And I think that a lot of that has to do with a lot of people are using this as like, oh, well, I can't concentrate right now. I must have ADHD. Like it's some kind of a joke. Like it's some kind of a thing that we all have. So we all need to throw this around. And, I've heard there are some famous TikTokers that have like Tourette syndrome who have said, like it doesn't feel good to make fun of me. It doesn't feel good for all of these people to be like, oh, I must have Tourette's, or everybody seems to have that all of a sudden, when not everyone does, and not everyone has the true diagnosis. And it's not an excuse for behavior, and it's not a means for someone to say, oh, you just don't want your child to be held accountable. It's like we do hold kids accountable in school. We do want children to be held accountable for their homework and things like that. We have to go about it a different way. Not everybody's mainstream. Not everybody is like going to fly their boat the same, or fly their boat, fly their plane like anybody, everyone else. And I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's good for conversation, and that it minimizes our experience when somebody says, "Oh, I do that too," or "I'm so forgetful. I must have ADHD." It is different. It is different. It's not just that we're forgetful. It's not just that everybody forgets things. That is normal. If you can't remember, like I literally have to wrap a post-it note around my finger, because if I don't, I will forget, like on my drive home, even if it's 5 minutes from one place to the other, I will forget that I need to stop to do something really important, like put gas in my car. And so that's when I think that it's like this, when it's impacting your life every single day, and there's all of these starts and stops, and you can't seem to accomplish much, and it's just taking you so much longer to do things. Life should not and is not that hard. It should not be that hard. And there's help out there for it. And so I just think I wanted to interject with that I feel like a lot of people have been talking about that lately. It's like everybody seems to have autism now. Everybody seems to, well, if we look at the Tylenol thing that we talked about earlier, for one, and then we look at not everyone does have it. For
No.
two, it minimizes the diagnosis. It minimizes this label that we now have. We have words to describe this experience we've had our whole lives that felt like a disabling experience. And, like working all the time to get what somebody else can get done in 7 hours, taking me 12,
Right.
um, all the getting sidetracked and all of the diversions, and just trying to focus and procrastinating, waiting to the last minute. Life doesn't have to feel like you have a fire under your tail all the time.
Yeah.
um,
That's
so
exactly, and like you said about it's not an excuse to not do your work or something along those lines. I think I work harder because, I don't know what it's like to not have ADHD. I'm convinced I was born with it, because I can look back into my younger years, as far as I can remember, being different, which I can see it now as ADHD, but I didn't have the words for it, like you said. But I think other people don't work as hard as me, because I'm like, I want to do things. And yes, I'm creative. So there is something that came from, into me, probably that was a benefit from ADHD, if you will, by,
mhm,
having creativity and a broader mind. So I can't say that that's all bad, but I
mhm.
think, like to get the same thing done as a person that doesn't have ADHD might take me twice as long, but I'll promise you every T is crossed and every I is dotted,
Mhm.
and because I've gone through the whole thing.
Meticulously.
Yes, and like 60 times, when the person without ADHD might have been like 5, I've been like, okay, we're
And
good.
and that just, of course, the teacher in me goes back to thinking about children, is that you and I we've been practicing this for years. We have been practicing how to check our work twice, how to like look over things, and also how to like painstakingly work ourselves through a task. Sometimes with, like, if I feel like a horse that I have to like, pull the reins, kind of hard, like stay on track. You need to get this done. And with children, they're still learning that, and it's really hard, and it's not easy. I mean, who wants to sit for hours and hours and hours to painstakingly go over step by step by step to learn a new task? Um, but it's how we learn, and it's how it has to happen, through repetition and just keeping at it and not giving up. And it just made me think about, that, and that, by that I mean we've had a lot of practice at
Yeah.
pulling ourselves through something, and like really push. It is a lot of struggle. It's really hard to sometimes finish them, especially if it's big. I think of me writing grants, and it would have a lot of pressure and a lot of time consumed by this thing. And and then starting to feel like an emotional earthquake in the last 3 weeks before a deadline, and just feeling like crippled with like anxiety. How am I going to get all of this done and have all of these other things and take care of kids and do all the things? But somehow learning these tricks to force myself to do these things. We had to do that alone. Now we have teachers that can help kids. And so I guess our hope in talking about, at least in your mind, I think both of us agree, in talking about ADHD more is to raise awareness about that. Like a lot of us did have to try really hard, and we didn't have the help. And why not accept the help if the help is out there for you through the school system? Like why not let your child be in a quiet classroom where I do better. There are some kids I found, I have some students that they need to listen to music and maybe watch a video and they're doing their math. Somehow it works. And I'm like, hey, let them do that. I personally need this like really quiet, I get easily distracted. And why not have a teacher pull your kid out, give them a snack, and say, we're going to work on this now. It's not being soft on your child. It's not being like, oh, they're just lazy and they don't want to do this work. It's in the schools, it is possible if you demand that they do so to create an environment where kids can learn and it doesn't have to be so hard. And that's what I think we all hope the future will be for young people, is that it doesn't have to be so hard, because those of us who kind of paved the way suffered, and we want to raise awareness about that, you know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay.
And yeah, so that you brought up a good point too of working as a teacher with children with ADHD and other things going on, that it's not necessarily something that we grow out of. Obviously, you and I didn't grow out of having ADHD. Some children can learn ways to help themselves, but it's not necessarily something. And I think that's another stigma that goes on. It's like that I've encountered myself. It's like, oh, isn't that for kids? And it's like, well, that one's like, it's not though. Yeah, it's not something that, like you said, though, you can learn tools, techniques, things to help yourself, that will hopefully guide you along the right path, but not, but doesn't necessarily mean it leaves you, so it's just ways to learn how to help yourself and how to work through the things that you have. And the thing about ADHD is that there's a multitude of symptoms that can show up in various ways between people, and even shows up differently with genders. It just shows up in different ways, for every person. I've heard this saying, if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. In other words, there's so many
everyone's different.
People. Yeah. And that's okay. But the bottom line is it comes from the chemistry in the prefrontal cortex, and the emotional dysregulation is a side effect of it. But the inability to, harness that attention, I've also heard this theory, and this could go and fit in the idea of ADHD is partly genetic, which I think that could very well be. I read a study that said, one study said 70% heritability, and the other study said 80. So I don't know, somewhere between 70 and 80% heritability, meaning that you get it from your parents, or
that's pretty high.
Yeah, it's pretty high. I don't know of another. I'm not a doctor, though, obviously, but point is that this study talked about how that could be a thing, but it could also be triggered by something environmentally, like the Tylenol. They don't know for a fact when I read those studies, but I also, I know that that's a possibility. So there's many different factors at play, in the person with ADHD. It is a neurodevelopmental thing, meaning that it's something that developed as you developed. That's what they believe to be, not something like you catch or you acquired later in life or something. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. Yeah.
And I know, I was just going to interject. I know you and I talked about doing some future talks, and inviting people, if they're interested in having a live discussion and posing some questions. We're open to that. Because as you were talking, something that came to my mind was thinking about just kind of like, as you were saying, like if you've met a person with ADHD, you've met a single person with ADHD. And there are, I think that like opening it up to like talk about this more, share our differences, share our similarities, because there are similarities. That's how they're able to like create a criteria to form a diagnosis. We
Right.
do have similarities, even though we're all so different. All human beings are different, but I I feel like maybe opening it up for more discussions in the future and seeing if there's an interest in people just having. I think that talking about this is so vital. It's just there are kids out there. I mean, forget just kids, there are adults out there. I try to be equitable to everyone. There are human beings out there that are struggling with ADHD that don't have, information, and they don't even realize that this is what's going on, and they're sadly taking their own lives. And I feel like talking about this more can save lives. Because I know that I have had moments where it's like, gosh, I'm a complete failure. Like, why can I not function like these other people? Why can I not do the things that other people are doing, or as quickly as they do them? And I know we can say, oh, that's just how some people's brains operate. Well, when you're having that experience, you can feel really depressed about it.
Yeah.
And I just think that having these conversations, and if we can target some people who would be interested in taking your very brief survey to help you with finding information about people for your astrology research, I think all the better. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
was just throwing that out there.
The research itself could be another way in which we can help people. That's the hopefully end goal. If I can
Mhm.
understand people through the lens of astrology with
Mhm.
ADHD, then hopefully develop tools or ways that can maybe help people. That's my goal with it. It's not just to do the research, although I do love that. It's to
Well,
understand it and hopefully create ways to help.
and I think like using the example you had earlier about bipolar is like the way that you can use astrology for that is like, hey, this particular time period might be a time that you want to be on guard. You might want to, get with your therapist. You might want to make sure that you're all buttoned up on your medicine or whatever you need during this time. I feel like that's how these things can be used as a tool
Right.
to help people and to make life easier. Like, why not? If we have this technology, like I said earlier, we don't have to no longer, ink and paper and draw out a natal chart. You don't have to do that anymore. Why not do the things that we're doing now and to try to make life easier on humanity? So
Yeah.
I just think it's cool, and I love raising awareness about not just ADHD but also special education. And I said earlier, all education is special, or all education should be special, but because I feel like those are the groups of people. I was that kid. I say that all the time. I was that kid, and I get kids that. I see when they're having a hard time, or I see when it's like, yeah, they're not paying attention, and what can I do to get that attention? But I just feel like for those of us that do have ADHD, talking about it is it's just very beneficial. And I
Yeah.
completely went down a rabbit hole that ended in nowhere, but that's okay. It's all good.
It's the ADHD rabbit hole. We're used to that here, at least me. But no, I definitely agree with you. And, just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, when I was first hinted into diagnosis, and maybe at some point that'll be a story for me to tell,
Mhm.
but it was like a question from my doctor, and then it wasn't necessarily like you have it. It was like, has anybody? And it was like, oh, I don't know. And then it was researching, and I can tell you from reading online, reading books, learning from, doctors that talk about it online. One doctor in particular, Dr. Russell Barkley, is really
Mhm.
big on the ADHD world. I got his book, something about how to manage adult ADHD, and
Mhm.
really helped me, one, understand what ADHD was, and two, understand that, like, it's something that people do struggle with. I think his brother, I think he's a twin, if I'm saying the story right, but he had ADHD and ended up getting into a car accident, which Russell Barkley has told the story about having, if his brother was diagnosed and treated for ADHD, he wouldn't have maybe, had these problems. I might be incorrect about the exactness of that story, but
Mm-hmm.
I heard it and I read it a few times. So I do understand that his brother did have ADHD and he's no longer with us, but the circumstances around it. But Russell Barkley, Dr. Barkley did say in different contexts that he could have had a different outcome. And that's the sad
And,
part.
and yeah, because accidents or being accident prone, which is something that it's just a term that I'm not a favorite, I'm not a fan of that, to say that someone's accident prone. But when you have ADHD, sometimes you're going so fast that accidents happen. And it's kind of like the brain is just sort of going along. My personal experience, I haven't had a lot of that, and I think it's just because I'm more on the attention side. But I see it with kids all the time. I see it with adults with ADHD all the time, where there's like things in the walkway, and they just kind of move around them really quickly, and sometimes fall or and so
Right.
accidents, like you were saying, and I know that you haven't completely for sure like that was the story, but I'm like, yeah, you could see that happening. Someone having a car accident because they're not focused on like what's going on, and
Right.
I was going to say hyper focused, but um, if your attention is like going all the time, it's easy to have something like that happen. But if you have an awareness and you have
Or,
treatment, maybe it can
yeah.
prevent.
Exactly,
Mhm.
or the impulsivity part of it, which we really didn't touch on a lot of, but I didn't
Oh,
realize
yeah.
I am so impulsive. And until I started understanding
Mhm.
what that meant, I was like, oh, I'm not impulsive. Like, I kind of rebuted that. I was like, that's not me.
Mhm.
When the doctor first asked me that question, he was a new doctor, like, has anybody tested you for ADHD? I was like, no, why? That's weird. Why would you even say that? And then went home and started reading. I'm like, oh my God, I'm reading the story of my life. Like, what is,
Mhm.
and like videos like this, people talking about it, that helped me understand. So, understanding how people relating to them is another purpose in which we're doing this, because, that helped me understand what is impulsivity. It's not necessarily that you're going to go jump off a bridge, which in my brain, that was impulsivity. It's like, I'm going to do something really crazy, fly a kite out in a thunderstorm or something,
Or
you know,
whatever, yeah.
or whatever,
Mhm.
like seemingly crazy thing. No, the impulsivity is sending the text without thinking before I actually hit send, or like
Mhm.
something where there's an impulse, and instead of like checking myself, like just acting upon the impulse and then going, why did I just do that? And like
Mhm.
you see it more when you start to understand it, you see it more. So awareness
Mhm.
is key with that one. Yeah.
Definitely. And I was also thinking of, as you were talking, how sometimes there is this, I don't know if you had the same experience, but it's like after you find out that you have this diagnosis and you've had these certain experiences come up, whether it's gosh, she never thinks before she talks, or gosh, she's never on time. I'm thinking of myself, and then later it's kind of like, gosh, give me a break. I have this thing going on with me, and I'm trying to learn about myself, and I'm trying to change. And I see that now. I see that I couldn't see that about myself, because when you have this, I'm not a fan of the term disability, but a label. You have this
Same.
label or
Yeah.
words for this thing that's going on with you. And when I've thought back to the times when people have been frustrated with me, like for not being on time, or for not being able to count on me to like that I'm going to show up, or I'm real big on that now. I'm like, you just have to show up, like you just have to do that.
Yes. My
Because
word
I
is
know there's
really important to me at this.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's because when you have people express that they're frustrated with you about something, you later want to fix that when you find out that you have this label, and there's a cause for it, and I'm trying to change. And I guess I'm just getting at, I wish we had more of a culture where it's like when somebody finds out that they have a diagnosis, it's like, hey, I had this thing going on with me that I didn't even know about. Can we start over? Like I'm going to do a better job, or I don't understand why we have this like all or nothing society where it's kind of like, people are continually changing and growing. And when we learn about ourselves, like whether it's a diagnosis or an illness or a cause, like this was happening because of this other thing. And I have autoimmune disease. Also, I have mixed connective tissue disease. And I've had a similar experience with that, where later it's like, could you please give me a pass now because I was sick. I
Right.
wasn't trying to be a jerk. That wasn't my intent. This was something that I could not help. Now that I'm treating it, I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to also be more clear. And I think that's why diagnosis is important with ADHD is like, I try to be more mindful about what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and letting people know like, hey, I just wanted to circle back. I felt like I was going a little fast yesterday and I didn't mean to be short with you. Or
Mm-hmm.
I was running late and I had to change my clothes 3 times before I left. I don't tell people that, but we were talking about that earlier. How I'm
Yes.
notorious for like, I'm, on the verge of being late and I'm like, oh, I need to change my clothes again. And it's just like, you know, I
This
guess
is
I'm just
not the
getting at,
outfit I started the day in, or middle of the day in, or maybe the end.
yes, yeah, I know. And,
It's been 4 outfits. My laundry machine loves me.
yeah. But I just feel like if we open the door more to talk about these types of things, maybe we can be more understanding of each other. And
Yeah.
I, I have heard compassion is a hard sell, but we can always hope that
Yeah.
we would be more caring towards each other about
Even
these
if
types of
it's not compassion from others, it's compassion for yourself, right?
things. Yeah,
That's a big
yeah.
one for me. And
Oh,
one day we'll talk about emotional dysregulation, RSD, those types of symptoms, because that's a whole conversation. But
yes, I'm
it's
with you because that will
it's
be a little
true.
in depth. Hmm.
Yes. But having that compassion for yourself and saying, you know what, I'm not making excuses for myself, but I'm giving myself a pass to say, okay, so it's okay to be not perfect
And
sometimes.
try again tomorrow.
It's okay to be 5 minutes late. The world's not gonna end because I was 5 minutes late or whatever that little thing that you
Exactly.
compassion for yourself, because that's where it starts. If you are compassionate towards yourself, then other people
Hmm.
can also give that to you, because if you're not and you're too hard on yourself and that's what you're exuding, maybe I'm getting a little woo here, but but if that's what you're exuding, people are going to respond to you in that way too. So
Hmm.
having that compassion is really important, even if it's just coming from
Yeah, I
yeah.
definitely agree. And then I get exactly what you're talking about for sure. And I definitely look forward to future conversations about it, and hopefully, you getting some more survey takers.
Yes,
And
definitely.
I don't know if you plan to put a link in your
Yep.
okay, in your description, and maybe if somebody watching this wants to take it, they could help out with. And you don't have to be into astrology. In fact, it's even better if you're like not.
Yep.
And you're just, if you think you have ADHD or you have ADHD, take this. Um, and that would be cool too. And I do look forward to the possibility of having more conversations about it, because I think that's
Me too.
amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so
Me
yeah.
too. Well, thank you so much, Anamir, for coming on with me. I will be honest with everybody here, just because, okay, it's like a whole big confession session over here. But I wanted to have this conversation, not necessarily just with you per se, although you are the perfect person to have this conversation with. And I did do a very short video talking about my research, and I just couldn't get myself, and that's what we were talking about last week when we were like, hey, let's, you know, and I was like, do you think you would want to talk with me? But I just wanted to start the conversation and get it rolling, because I think it's a big deal. And I think that a lot of people can grow and heal and help them on their path. I'm not saying I'm going to wave a magic wand, or Anna Mir is going to wave the magic wand, although she might probably has one. But I don't necessarily think that's it, but, you know, understanding that you're not alone is a big one. So I really appreciate you coming on today and talking with me.
Well, I'm glad you invited me, and I'm grateful and happy to be here, and it's been awesome. So
Awesome.
good.
All right, so we'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for watching. Let us know in the comments, and of course, follow the channel if you're interested in learning more about us and learning more about ADHD or even astrology, because I do videos on astrology too. And we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.